Sure. That's what I am. I'm a soil scientist, but I'm also a viticulturalist. So I have, graduate degrees in both. And so I span that fence or that gap in between the two fields such that I do soil analysis, use that data, and it's not just soil chemistry, but actually soil physical data also. So we go out and dig holes in the ground. We do a morphological description of the soil profile. That includes things like the color, soil textures, whether like a loam, clay loam, that sort of thing. Soil structure, that's how the particles are aggregated, and it relates to how well the soils drain, allow water to drain out of the bottom. Rock content, hardness, rock type, and we use that in porosity, and we use all that information to then help us with understanding how deep we want to till the soil, what kind of rootstocks we want to put in that soil, any other issues that would be related to either rock, impenetrable rock, what kind of ripper shank when we rip, because most of these soils, you only get one chance in 30 years. There's a lot of 30-year decisions made when you first plant a vineyard, and one of them is to deep till the soil, usually to what you want the root zone to be, because loosening up the soil or tillage infuses air into it, so it kind of lifts the soil up a little bit, adds more air, and therefore reduces the density of the soil, and consequently allows roots to penetrate it more readily. And so you get better root exploitation in that first 2 or 3 years if you have deep tilled it. So we have that kind of information coming from the soil physics, and then we take soil samples from each of the horizons that we see. And usually we'll see 3 or 4 horizons per profile. Some are very abrupt between the horizon where you can easily see it. Some take a little bit more sleuthing of hardness and or textural differences that may not show up visually. And we'll take samples from each of those, send it off to a chemistry lab. We'll take a sample of roots, soil and roots that'll go off to a nematode lab, and then we get all of that data back and interpret the data and then write up the text to explain the data and then recommendations as to how we recommend this data be used to establish your new vineyard. So there's everything from where the blocks start and stop, because we want to, the overarching goal of vineyard design is to have uniform soil within a uniform vineyard block. And when the soil starts to change as you go around a landscape, we need to have block boundaries. We break the block into 2 or 3 pieces so that we continually have uniform soil within a block. The reason we want uniform soil is because we don't want to have a vineyard block in which it matures separately or matures differently from one end to the next. Because these winemakers are going to go through a couple of weeks before harvest, and they're going to start tasting fruit, and they're going to mark when all of a sudden, the fruit has just gone through a change such that we don't want this, the fruit where I'm getting into right now is not ripe enough. The fruit I was just into is barely ripe enough. And so they end up breaking that block in half or diagonally, across the, 1/3 into 2/3. And they say, okay, well, we're going to pick this one on Friday, and we're going to pick the other portion that wasn't ripe probably next Tuesday or Wednesday. And a double pick in a vineyard is a failure of vineyard design. When you have to go into a block twice, it just shows that the vineyard block was not designed properly. And so we use these soil information to compartmentalize the soil so that you get uniform vine growth, uniform fruit ripening, and therefore uniform fruit quality within the harvest zone or the irrigation zone of that particular block. And then, depending on the variety, the rootstock, the next block may be different. It might be a week later just because of the combinations of various inputs that went into it. It may mature slightly later or slightly earlier, but at any rate, the whole concept is try to get the soil's uniformity within the soil so that we can then go through this process of the actual design, row orientation, rootstock selection, deep tillage depth, deep tillage implement, what kind of amendments need to go on to the soil, what needs to go on before it's deep tilled, what kind of things need to go on after it's deep tilled, so that the vineyard starts off at its best possible state to give those vines a boost for their, the first 3 or 4 years where they're really just trying to get themselves established so that they can then just run with it for the next 30 or 40 years as the vineyard goes through its numerous, continued maturation process. www.vineyardsoil.com. And the Instagram is also Vineyard Soil.